We haven't.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming along to our webinar this evening on the Renters' Rights Act 2025. We're just letting people filter in. We've had nearly 150 people register for this webinar, so it just shows the interest that's out there on this subject. And it's lovely to, having looked at the registrants list, it's lovely to see many of our current clients have joined us tonight. So thank you very much, as well as other landlords that we don't currently work with. So fantastic to see you all, and thank you for coming along. We're going to talk about the Renters' Rights Act, which is the hot topic at the moment in the rental sector, and we'll try and keep things to an hour. And whilst we're talking about legislation, we'll try and keep it as upbeat and interesting as we can for you. Just to give you sort of a quick agenda, we're going to give you an overview of the Renters' Rights Act. That act is about 226 pages long. So, we're going to give you an overview of it, and then we'll kind of deal with any questions towards the end, and then take things offline if there's any really complicated questions. Because obviously it's a very recent thing which we're still getting to grips with. We're going to run through the key changes for landlords and agents and what that means for you. Changes to tenancy agreements that are coming along as part of this, and how to deal with rent reviews, and talk about compliance and your risk management, which is a really important thing. One of the main jobs we do as a letting agent these days, to be honest, is to keep our clients compliant and ensure they don't get fined. And so we're going to talk about that as well. And then obviously how Charles David Casson can help you with that. And obviously clients who already work with us on a fully managed basis, we've got you covered, and we'll show everybody else what you need to do to ensure that you are compliant. So just because I'm conscious there are some people on the webinar who may not know who we are, myself and my brother Matt, we are the directors of Charles David Casson. We're also joined by Hannah Bailey from Good Lord, who are our rent protection provider and also provide our tenant onboarding software. So thank you very much for joining us as well, Hannah. Matt and I, as I say, we're the directors of Charles David Casson, which is an estate and letting agency based here in Chelmsford, but we service the whole of Essex, and we even manage some properties a bit further afield for other letting agents who don't have a specialist property management department. Matt and I also have a consulting business, and we provide training and consultancy to other estate and letting agents. And finally, we have the HMO network, which is a national network of specialist HMO, house of multiple occupancy, letting agents and property managers. And at Charles David Casson, we do both single lets and HMOs. And that HMO network is responsible for around about 13,000 tenancies across the country now. So the point of me mentioning all of that is that, we know what we're doing, but also if we come across anything that we haven't seen, we've got a huge sort of resource pool to pull on. And to be honest, if we haven't seen it, someone we know will have done. We're often asked to speak at events and landlord seminars, property investment seminars, and estate agency conferences as well. And this is us with some of our senior property managers and property management team at the recent Esther's conference, where we won some awards, which we're very proud of. And also, as you can see, we've been certified in the renters' rights legislation by Rightmove, and that's something we're really committed to here at Charles David Casson. One of our core values is that we learn, and we're committed to constant learning to make sure we're up to date in order to protect our clients and their investments. It's just we're really proud that we get lots of 5-star reviews from landlords, and there's just a few there on the screen. And whilst we see, obviously, landlords, you are our clients, and we have your best interests at heart. We really are proud of the fact that we win tenant awards as well. And we recently won, this was only last month, the Gold Award for the whole of the South East, and also the Best in County. And that was voted for by actual tenants that have dealt with Charles David Casson. So we're really proud of those reviews because they're based on real life reviews. We can't buy those awards, so we're really proud to have achieved that. And looking after tenants is it'll become apparent as we go through this presentation, but looking after tenants is becoming more and more important, and you'll kind of realise, goes without saying really, but you'll kind of realise why as we move along. So let's get into it. And the first message I want to give is for those of you who remember Dad's Army and Corporal Jones, don't panic, don't panic. And I've kind of been going through my head today whether I'm going to try and do it in his voice or my own. And I think I've just done it in probably a hybrid version there. But yeah, there's a lot to there's a kind of a lot to go through here. There's a lot changing. This is the biggest change in the private rented sector since the Housing Act was first introduced in 1988. But as with everything, there's nothing to panic about. We just have to deal with things properly. And that's obviously what we're here to do for you. You do have to realise that this is coming in hot, though, because last week we found out the first stage implementation date is the 1st of May 2026. So up until I think last Friday, we didn't know exactly when this was going to come into force, but we do now know that's going to be the 1st of May 2026. So that's how long we've got to prepare for this coming in, which isn't, in the grand scheme of things, very long at all. And the government are obviously taking it quite seriously because they've already given, from the 27th of December this year, they've granted local councils extra enforcement powers, which will actually allow them to come into letting agency premises and demand documents, and also demand that from landlords as well. So that they're stepping up their enforcement action in anticipation of this. So let's talk through some of the headlines of the Act and what is changing. The first thing is there will be no more assured short hold tenancies, what we commonly known as ASTs, which is how tenancy agreements are currently structured. And much like that black and white television, they will be a thing of the past. So essentially the entire way a tenancy is structured will be changing. All tenancies as of the 1st of May will become assured periodic tenancies. That will be the new name, and I'm sure we'll end up referring to that as an APT. So basically all tenancies as of the 1st of May 2026 will convert on the implementation date. There'll be no more reason to renew a tenancy. But we will be talking about rent reviews later because it's very important. There's still action to take once a year on your tenancies. So the big change is that there'll be no more fixed terms, and a tenant will be able to give 2 months notice essentially from day one of the tenancy. Now, that's highly unlikely because people do have to go through quite a rigmarole in order to move and set up their broadband and council tax and everything like that. And there's generally obviously a reason they've moved in the first place. But it is a risk. It is a bigger risk. And it will be more important to look after these tenants and actually provide them with what they were expecting. I personally see the biggest risk is a tenant moving into a property and it not being well maintained, it not being what they were promised, and that may be a reason that they do decide they're not gonna suffer that, and they now do have the option to give 2 months notice and move on. Landlords will have to give 4 months notice where they're allowed, but a tenant will benefit from a 12-month initial protection. So from the first date of the tenancy, tenants will actually have a 12-month initial protection. So from their side, essentially they're getting a 12-month fixed term, but that's not returned in kind of the landlord's favour. And something meant to say at the start actually was there's going to be a lot I'm probably going to mention this evening that we're not big fans of. Big fans of ourselves, and you're probably sitting the other side of this screen thinking, well, this doesn't seem very fair, and I don't like that. And I would agree with you. And there's a lot of things that aren't particularly fair as part of this act in terms of from a landlord's point of view. But I think the message I've got to give really is it's here. It's been given royal assent. We've got an implementation date, so we just have to deal with what's in front of us, and that's what we're going to do for you. So Section 21, we're going to come on to that. That's being abolished, and landlords will have to rely on the grounds of Section 8, which we'll also discuss in a moment. So Section 21 is the so-called no-fault eviction, which, up until now, we've been able to, outside of a fixed term, serve a tenant 2 months' notice, and as long as the notice was done on the correct prescribed form, and all of the other documentation that needed to be in place was in place, then you could give the tenant 2 months' notice and not have to give them a reason for wanting possession of the property back. That is changing. That will no longer be the case, and instead you must use a Section 8 notice. Now, Section 8 notices come with both mandatory grounds and discretionary grounds. So there's some mandatory grounds whereby, again, if you use the correct form, all the correct paperwork is in place, and the notice is served correctly, the court must grant you possession. And then there's discretionary grounds where they're exactly that, it's down to the judge's discretion as to whether he or she would grant you possession at that particular court hearing. I think it's also, really important to mention, we've been holding landlord seminars for many years now, and we've talked about the fact that there's over 170 pieces of legislation that go along with renting property out, and none of that goes away. So all the documents, that we have to serve in order to gain possessions, all of that still has to be done. All that's happening here is the Section 21 is being taken away, and the structure of tenancies is changing. What is important to mention is that landlords can get possession. So if that's why I say you don't need to panic. You will be able to get possession of your property back for legitimate reasons. But what this is preventing, it's going to be more difficult. This is preventing us just saying, frankly, I don't like that tenant, get them out, just give them 2 months' notice. That practice is being stopped, and you will have to serve a Section 8 notice to get possession of the property back. So evidence and record keeping is going to be more important than ever. Once a Section 8 notice is served on the prescribed form, which is a Form 3, that will be valid for 12 months from the date of service. So if you don't act on it straight away, there will be a bit of time to act on it. But that's something we'll obviously talk you through as needed. So I can't go through all of the grounds because we'd be here all evening. So I'm going to just talk through kind of a few common ones and the sort of the main reasons you might want to get possession back, which generally landlords say to us is because they want to sell the property or they want to move back into it. So the first two grounds, ground 1 and ground 1A, cover that exact scenario. If you wanted to sell up or you wanted yourself or a family member to move in. Then there are grounds such as redevelopment by the landlord. That doesn't mean I'm going to stick a new kitchen in. Redevelopment, that clause means you are going to substantially change the property, fully redevelop it, knock it down, rebuild it, put a huge extension on it, that kind of thing. So what the government have really done here is close loopholes in order for getting possession back. So we really have to think about the right timing, etc. when you do want possession of the property back. But the important thing is you can get it. Something really important to mention is that for grounds 1 and 1A, if you wanted to move in or sell the property, that's fine, you can do that, but there will then be a restricted period of 12 months after evicting the tenant where the property can't be relet. And this is where I'm sure there's people kind of snarling at the screen when I say that, because yeah, it's not fair at the end of the day, but it is what the legislation says, and we do have to deal with it. So if you're considering selling your buy to let or moving back into it, then we really need to kind of think about the timing, and pricing will be key because obviously if it doesn't sell, you can't relet it for those 12 months. So that's something we'll be really keen to advise people on and have those discussions in advance. You'll see notice periods are longer as well, so 4 months notice rather than as we have been used to 2 months notice. So just more forward planning, but we can get possession of your property back. Some more common grounds. Those were some of the mandatory grounds. Here are some of the discretionary grounds. So if the tenant is in any rent arrears, if they're persistently in arrears, if they breach tenancy conditions, if the property's deteriorated, or any antisocial behaviour, some of those are discretion. And there's a lot more than I've listed here. As I say, we can't go through all of them tonight, but just wanted to show you really that there are things that we can get possession of the property back for, but especially where it's discretionary grounds, we're really going to need a lot of evidence to present to a judge to show why it's worth taking somebody's home away from them for these reasons. I'm going to talk about rent arrears a bit more in a while, but first of all, I just want to talk about rent reviews and Section 13 notices. So again, because there's no fixed term, that takes away the ability to do a renewal and increase the rent at that point. So the only way going forward of increasing your rent is going to be by service of a Section 13 notice. And you must use the prescribed form in order to do that. That must be served in line with the rent date and can only be once every 12 months. Now, that's not unusual. We already, outside of a fixed term, use a Section 13 notice to increase the rent. And the only thing that's changing here is that tenants must be given 2 months' notice, whereas currently it's just at least 1 month's notice. But it's important to note the increase must be in line with the market rent. So what is the problem here? Is that the tenant can challenge the rent increase at something called the first tier tribunal. And the first tier tribunal is then able to decide whether the rent increase is fair or not. Now, that's already actually something that's in place, but it's just not that commonly known, and it's kind of hardly ever done, if I'm honest. But now we've got things like tenant activist groups, ambulance chaser law firms already sort of telling tenants that you'll be able to do this. So we are in a situation where you may find an increase in tenants challenging their rent increases just because they can, and it's more commonly known. The thing that has changed is that if they do challenge you and take you to the first tier tribunal, you can't charge that rent increase once it's been disputed until the tribunal decides on it. And if they do decide in your favour and decide that yeah, that's a fair increase, the tenant won't be required to pay the backdated amount due to you. So if it took 6 months for the first tier tribunal to hear that, you wouldn't be able to charge that rent increase until they did hear it. So yeah, it doesn't sound cool to anyone. What is the solution? Well, all rent increases must now be backed by data. So it's really important that we have comparable evidence of other things that have been let recently. We have access to data to provide that to the first tier tribunal when it does go to that. Thankfully, we've got access to lots of data, both our own and from external sources, and the software we use allows for audit trails, evidence, and proper service of the prescribed forms to make sure that this is done in the proper way. And yeah, rent and legal protection is just a must, really. It's becoming a bit of a non-negotiable, and Hannah's going to give us some details on that in a little while. But we have a solution for you to cover you for all of these extra risks that I've been talking about. So using our software, Good Lord, hopefully you can see some of that. On the right of your screen, you'll see the Form 4, which is the prescribed form for a Section 13 notice. And I keep mentioning the word prescribed form because, we get it all the time where a landlord who's self-managing calls up and says, "Oh, Neil, I emailed my tenant and told them the rent was going up," or "I emailed my tenant and I told them that I need possession of the property back." And that just doesn't work. It has to be done on the proper paperwork, and service of these documents has to be done properly. So we're very, very systemised here at Charles David Casson, through our partners, Good Lord, and other softwares we use as well. But we're able to serve a Section 13 notice from this software, time stamped and dated, etc., and serve the Section 13 notice so that we can prove the service of it and make sure it's done on the correct prescribed form. And as I said, we've got access to sort of untold amounts of data, really, both through the public sources, Rightmove and Zoopla, but we also have access to the back end of those systems to see what things have actually rented for. We've got lots of data systems we use. Good Lord, of course. Service agents all across the country, so have a plethora of data that they can pull on, and of course our own data. We're arranging north of 200 tenancies every year, so we're able to give real-time data that if we were taken to the tribunal, we'd be able to easily prove that rent increase was justified. So let's talk about rent arrears. Hope everybody's still awake. I'll give myself a little clap of the hands to pep me up as well. And let's talk about the subject of rent arrears. So, what's changing here? Someone else gave a clap. I like it. I don't know if that was Matt or one of the audience, but I appreciate it. So, what's changing here is the tenant can now get into 3 months arrears if they're paying monthly. That's previously been 2 months, but they're now allowed to get into an extra month's worth of arrears before we can evict them, under the mandatory ground of rent arrears, or 13 weeks rent, which was previously 8 if they're paying weekly. We don't have that situation. Everybody pays us monthly. And this amount must be owed both at the time we serve notice and at the date of the court hearing. So the big kind of risk here is that tenants get into arrears. They're in 3 months arrears. We serve them a Section 8 notice, and on the day of the court hearing, they pay off 2 weeks' rent to get themselves under that 3-month amount, and then the court would not hear it. They would just throw that case out. And that's the same case as it is now. It's just it's an extra month's worth of rent that they're allowed to get into arrears of. As I said earlier, there are discretionary grounds as well, such as persistent late payment and things like that, but they're discretionary. Possession is not guaranteed under that. So the best protection is the rent and legal protection policy, which Hannah will talk to you about in a short while, because you do need to be covered for these risks. I think, we've seen over the last year or so, the cost of living rising. We are seeing people starting to struggle more and more and more. And we've been doing this 14 years now. Charles David Casson's been going, and I always used to say to landlords, look, we've got these policies, but to be honest, we don't claim on them very often. But the reality is we do claim on them more and more now, because somebody that is a good tenant when we place them, things go wrong in people's lives, people lose jobs, etc. So the more protection you've got out there, the better, in my opinion. This is just a screenshot of our rent collection system, so that we can see live real-time arrears. We can account for part payments. So when we're dealing with rent arrears, it's very, very easy for us to provide to insurers, to courts, evidence of exactly if somebody is a persistent late payer. We've got audit trails, etc. So if you're a self-managing landlord, that's difficult to provide, especially if you've got a full-time job. Just want to talk briefly about rental bidding and advanced rent. So first of all, rental bidding. So under this new legislation, landlords are only going to be able to accept the advertised rent, and accepting any more is now going to be banned. So therefore, no rental bidding. Now, in practice, if I'm honest, it wasn't really a common thing. But what this is going to prevent is if we have two or three, four tenants that are all interested in the same property, we're not going to be able to say, okay, who will pay us a bit more and accept that. That won't be allowed anymore. So we can only accept the rent that it's advertised for. And there is some people's trail of thought is, okay, well, look, let's just advertise it for more then. And because you're allowed to accept less, of course, but let's advertise it for more and kind of see where it settles. The rental market doesn't work like that. So pricing things correctly, getting them let quickly is still the way forward. But it's just important to know, yeah, we can't accept anything more than it's advertised for. So we've got to make sure it's priced right in the first place. The big change is the advanced rent. So at the moment, you can take 12 months in advance if you want. You can collect the move-in money before you allow the tenant to sign the agreement. Both of those things are now being banned. So we'll only be able to take a maximum of 1 month's rent in advance, and that can only be accepted after both the tenant and landlord have signed the tenancy agreement. So yeah, we could be in a situation where we grant a tenancy to somebody, it's legally bound, and then the tenant says, "Oh, actually, I'm a bit short this month, so I'll pay you next month," and they decide not to pay you that first month's rent. You know, how often that's going to happen, obviously, time will tell. I don't think it's going to happen every time, but it is an increased risk, and it's something we've got to account for because it is a change to the process. And if you remember the tenant fee ban when that came in 2018, I think these things are called prohibited payments. And essentially, if you accept them, you have to return it and you'll get a fine for doing it. So accepting anything other than the holding deposit of 1 week's rent is now going to become a prohibited payment before the tenancy agreement is signed. So yeah, very, very important that handling of funds is done correctly on the move in, and also you're protected for that risk. And yeah, there's going to be no more 12 months in advance for tenants who couldn't pass referencing. So, it is cutting out a section of the market. It's a big problem in student lettings, actually, where people are coming from abroad and they would want to pay in advance. But even, people who have maybe had a marriage breakup or just sold their house and they can't pass the affordability criteria for whatever reason. Some landlords would accept 12 months in advance off them, but we're not going to be able to do that anymore. And actually, it's really, the legislation says you can't accept it, you can't entice somebody to pay it. So we've got to be very, very careful when it comes to taking rent in advance. The other thing is, this sort of been quite headline news, is pets in rented property. So basically, tenants will be allowed to request a pet. Landlords will have 28 days in which to respond. So it's actually now become a compliance requirement of ours that it's putting another deadline on us all, that if a tenant fancies getting themselves a dog or cat, we've got to put that on the stop clock, 28 days in which to respond. And the thing to discuss here is really that landlords can't unreasonably refuse. That is the way the legislation is worded. And refusals must be given clearly in writing, stating why. Now, when we talk about unreasonably, this is how, from a legal point of view, it's not our personal preferences. This is what a court would consider reasonable, and how they sort of would see that in a legal environment. Obviously, it's reasonable where the head lease prevents it. So if your rental property is in a block of flats and the lease states that no pets are allowed, then of course that's reasonable. If your rental property is a studio flat and somebody requests a horse, of course that is going to be unreasonable as well. And there may be other circumstances where it genuinely is unreasonable, but it's going to be difficult to if somebody asks to have a cat or a small dog, things like that, it is going to be difficult to refuse those things. Um, which is why, again, we'll talk about extra damage cover and things like that in a little while. And then prohibiting discrimination is a big thing that's coming out as part of this act as well. Now, obviously, discriminating on the basis of race, gender, etc., is wrong anyway, and I'm sure we'd all agree on that. What this is really aimed at is the fact that landlords won't be able to blanket ban no DSS, no benefits, no children. So we mustn't put any of that in rental adverts, and we mustn't make decisions based on that. And clear reasons will need to be given when declining a tenant to make sure, because people will accuse us of discriminating against them for those things. So we can't purely make decisions based on people's finances, etc. I think the good thing is most DSS tenants won't meet the affordability criteria anyway, but it's just really, really important that we handle that properly, and we're not sort of blanket banning people for different things. So I think I've probably covered most of the stuff that's happening in the first phase, which is the 1st of May. And then there will be a second phase of this legislation coming in, which is the PRS, Private Rented Sector Database, and the Private Sector Ombudsman Scheme. And what this is going to mean is that landlords are going to have to register all of their properties on the private rented database. So the government wants to know what you've got, basically. They want to know what you're up to. This will have to be done before the landlord advertises or lets the property. And of course, whenever I refer to a landlord, I mean landlord or letting agent. So if we're doing it on your behalf, we'll have to ensure that you've registered your property on the database. Landlords are also going to have to join a private rented ombudsman scheme. Now, we as agents, we already have that requirement to legally trade. We are a member of the property ombudsman, which is what's called our redress scheme, and that allows tenants and landlords to raise complaints against us, and then those be adjudicated. And tenants will now be able to raise complaints directly against their landlord through that ombudsman scheme. Currently, as I say, they can only complain about us as agents. So we haven't got an exact timeline for that. That's something the government's got to set up, but they have put it in this legislation, so it is coming. And essentially, failure to register on the database once that does come in will prevent you from obtaining possession of the property. So much like you haven't served the gas certificate and the electrical certificate, etc. At the moment, you can't get possession until you do that. This will be the same. You'll have to rectify that. And within all of this legislation, there's fines ranging from £7,000 for an initial breach to £40,000 for further breaches. So potential rent repayment orders as well. So I think you just got to make sure you're doing everything properly and take professional advice. There's also something called a decent home standard and AWAB's law coming in. I'm sure I saw the other day AWAB's law is not actually coming in until about 2028. So don't quote me on that. I'll go back and reread that part. But essentially, they're introducing something called a decent home standard. This is going to provide a basic standard of rental properties, and they're taking health and safety a lot more seriously. Now, most of you who are on this webinar have probably got very good rental properties, you're very good landlords. That's why you're here, and you're looking to learn. So all of this stuff is to drive out the rogue landlords, which are the minority, but that is what they're doing it for. Local authorities will be able to take action and make prevention orders, and AWAB's law is extending to the private rented sector. Currently, it's to do with damp and mould, and it's a very tragic story where a young boy died as a result of damp and mould in a social housing property, actually. And so, the reality is they need to take a lot harsher action on the social housing sector, actually. But they're extending that law into the private rented sector. And so really, all this means is any reports of damp and mould, any health and safety issues, need to be dealt with swiftly, and there'll be new time frames coming into practice. But the reality is, it's a common sense approach. If it needs fixing, we need to fix it. And anything that's a health and safety issue, then yeah, we need to go on and take action against it. So, how can we help? Well, our managed clients are already in very safe hands, and we take care of all of this stuff. No matter how many times the legislation changes, we're learning about it. We're putting out, changing our processes and putting things in place to make sure you are covered. I said I'd try and use a bit of humour as we go through, so I always say use protection. I wasn't talking about Firefox, which is the internet protection, but yeah. So I'm going to hand over to Hannah now, who's going to talk to you about our rent protection product through Good Lord and how that can help you.
Perfect. Thank you, Neil. I'm Hannah, everybody. Nice to kind of meet you in a way. But I'm one of the insurance development managers at Good Lord. So we're obviously partnered with Charles David Casson, and I essentially am here to help make sure that everything runs smoothly for them when they are offering this service to you. Obviously, with everything that Neil has been through this evening, it's a huge change, and it is really, really important that you have that peace of mind and that protection should something go wrong. And we offer a rent and legal protection product through which obviously goes through Charles David Casson to you as a rent protection service, which will give you that peace of mind. So hopefully what I run through today will give you a little bit of positive news, and it will just provide you with that cover that you need ahead of the changes that are set to come in. Next slide, please. There we go. Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot I had control of that.
It's fine. I don't have access to it, so I'll just have to keep saying next slide. But essentially, just a few statistics here. So we run a state of the lettings industry report once a year, where we'll survey landlords, agents, tenants, all about the current market and obviously the climate that we're in at the moment. Now, there's some statistics on here which we have retrieved from the survey, which directly sort of correlate into everything that Neil has been talking about today. Now, it's obviously really important to know that these statistics do link in to rent protection and how that can help. But a third of tenants that we surveyed essentially said that a 3% rent increase would actually put them into financial distress. Obviously, we've got all of the changes coming in with the Renters' Rights Act, but the cost of living crisis is a thing. It is detrimental to tenants, and a 3% increase is so marginal, so small, but that can push tenants into financial distress. It just shows that can contribute towards arrears, which is obviously where rent protection is really, really helpful and useful. 22% of tenants have said that they will actually be appealing any rent increase, whether they believe it to be fair or not fair market value, when the bill becomes effective. So obviously, Neil mentioned obviously the Section 13s, first tier tribunals, and what that process is going to look like. Here it shows that 22% of tenants are going to be disputing that increase, whether they believe it to be fair or not fair. So that's 1 in 5 tenants. So we are going to see a lot more of those happening, a lot more tribunal cases. And I do think that people like Martin Lewis are going to be potentially talking about it a little bit more, so that it does become more on tenants' radars that they have the right to dispute it. And then just sort of coming back to the idea of obviously the cost of living crisis, almost half, so 42% of tenants that we surveyed, they have stated that they are in rent poverty. Good Lord deem rent poverty or define rent poverty as spending 40% or more of their gross income on rent. So it just sort of shows the ratio of their salary, their money that they are spending towards rent. So if something does go wrong, it could push them into financial distress. Next slide, please. So what's included in the rent protection service? So hopefully this is going to be a bit of hope, a resolution to the things that are coming in within the changes, and obviously the current market at the moment. So this rent protection service is available to you through Charles David Casson. As I mentioned, we are partnered with them, so this is something that we can provide them, therefore they can provide you should you want it. So essentially, rent protection, it is rent and legal protection. It is there to protect you if something goes wrong, i.e. the tenant falls into arrears, the tenant breaches their tenancy. This is a service that will completely cover you for those things and make sure that you can get your property back and that you're paid up until the point that you can get your property back. Now, essentially, what this does is we will cover 100% of the rent up until we have got vacant possession of the property. Now, a really good feature here is that there is not a monthly cap on how many payments we will make. So if there's more sort of evictions going through court, those court times are going to increase. So worst case scenario, it took 12, 15 months to get your tenant out of the property. You will be receiving the rent every single month, which is really important. So it means that you are covered up until the point that that tenant leaves. Now, obviously, there is a total indemnity. So the maximum that essentially you can claim per claim is £100,000 worth, but we are very confident that will be enough cover to get you through the process. That indemnity includes the legal expenses as well. So that will include the eviction for rent arrears, but it will also include any other major breach in tenancy too. So let's say your tenant is paying the rent fine, but they have sublet the property, they've caused illegal activity, Charles David Casson have served notice and they have failed to vacate after that notice has expired. The legal side of the service, it does stand on its own as well. So you can make Charles David Casson can make a claim for that and obviously go through the process to get the tenant out from there. Once we've got vacant possession of your property, which is the main aim, we can also make a vacant possession payment, which is going to be up to 6 weeks at 90% of the rent following that tenant leaving. So what it means here is you are essentially covered for the void period between the property being empty and then you reletting it. It's going to be a bit of extra money, especially if there's some damages to the property or anything like that. Some works that you need to do before getting it back up to livable standards. You've got 6 weeks at 90% of the rent there to cover you. Just a note there, you do need to relet through Charles David Casson because it is a service that they provide. So that's something that you need to do in order to get that money. And the policy is nil excess. So there's no excess payable. Charles David Casson needs to make sure the claim comes to us within those first 45 days, which I'm sure they will, to benefit from that nil excess there. In terms of when you can expect to see the first payment, we do pay the rent in arrears just to be transparent. Usually it should land at around day 35 to 37, so sort of first week of the second month being due. These are some additional features here. So you've got your bread and butter with your rent and legal protection. Now, this is essentially additions to the service, and what it means is essentially you're covered for the changes that are coming in. So we recognise that sometimes a tenant that doesn't pay or doesn't leave or breaches their tenancy, there can be a correlation between that and then there obviously being damage at the property as well. So what we will do is if you get to the end of the claim and the deposit isn't enough to cover the damages, we can actually pay up to £1,000 on top of that deposit amount, which will help go towards the damages of the property. So it just means that you've got that extra level of cover from a damages perspective. And in particular, if tenants are living in the property for longer with those eviction times set to increase, it means you've got that extra level of cover should there be more damage as well. If you need to move back into your rental property and your tenant is not leaving, we can actually offer you alternative accommodation and storage as well. So we will cover 90 days worth of accommodation and storage for yourself at £175 a day for accommodation and £15 a day for storage. Now, just to note, you can only have this if you need to move back into your rental property and the tenant isn't leaving. It won't cover the full eviction, but what it will do is it will give you somewhere else to stay whilst you find somewhere more permanent. The next two things are Renters' Rights Act specific features. So we are the only provider within our market space that offers this at the moment. But what we will be doing is we will be covering the increase in rent on a valid Section 13 if your tenant refuses to pay. So obviously 22% of tenants are going to be disputing that increase, therefore it's going to be going to a tribunal. Tribunal will have the final decision. During that time, you aren't going to be getting your increased rent. You will only get it from when the tribunal say yes, which is obviously what Neil mentioned. What we have done is we have added in that we will cover that increase whilst it goes through tribunal. So if it was £100 increase, tenant disputes it, we will cover that £100 every month. Now, what's important to note is that it is capped at 6 months, so that's the maximum time that we'll pay out for. And it does also mean that, well, we are also led by the tribunals as well. So that is just something to bear in mind if the rent increase is unfair. And then final thing is that we will also be offering instant relief on the first month's rent in the event that the tenant does obtain the keys before the funds have been received. So coming back to Neil's point, obviously you can't take the first month's rent prior to the tenancy agreement being signed. If your tenant collects the keys, because it's a legally bound contract, but they don't pay the rent, we will cover that within 5 working days of your tenants moving into the property. So it means that you've got instant relief on that first month's rent. You're getting it from the beginning, and at that point it will be a claim anyway. So we can obviously continue to pay up until possession. So what you get there versus not having rent protection at all is you would be covered from the beginning versus not having any rent in that scenario, worst case scenario, up until the point that that tenant leaves. That is obviously everything that's included within the service. When you obviously go through the Q&A session at the end, feel free to ask me any questions. It is a service that Charles David Casson will offer to you. So any pricing or anything like that, you can bring up with them directly. Okay. Perfect. I think that was everything for me.
That is brilliant. Thank you, Hannah.
No problems.
Yeah, and we've obviously been working with Good Lord for a long time now, and we currently supply landlords with rent protection insurance. And obviously, when all these changes came out, we were looking at it thinking, how do we protect people from this? And Good Lord have, I've got to say, really stepped up with basically looking at the increased risk landlord are facing and trying to plug all of those gaps. So we're really, really happy that we can provide that to people. Because it really, I think one major thing there is that extra, we can only take a 5-week deposit. That's been the case for quite a while now. But having that extra £1,000 on top of the deposit towards damage, is a real bonus really for landlords. And also the Section 13 cover, that could get used quite a lot. So I think I'm pleased you've been able to cover that for people. So.
Neil, just quickly, sorry,
yes.
I feel like I should speak. Are we able to go back a slide? Somebody just asked if they could just read through the slide one more time.
Do you want me to run back through it again? Or are we just...
I think just give somebody the chance just to have another quick look, if that's okay.
Yeah,
there's been a couple of other questions, but we'll do a little Q&A at the end, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Neil.
Yeah, no problems. We can also obviously pick up with Rahul, who's asked that, and contact him if he wants a copy of the slides and things like that as well. So, right, where are we? Let's move through. So, yeah, I would, I say this because I want everybody to be covered. I would seriously consider having a conversation with us. If you're under our full management, then you're kind of, we're looking after you already. If you're one of our clients, you don't have rent and legal protection, then speak to your property manager about it. Because if you're managing your own properties at the minute, then I'd seriously consider having a conversation with us regarding upgrading to a full management service for peace of mind, or going on to we do have a mid-tier kind of service where we collect the rent and protect it with a policy as well. So if you want to still remain in some sort of control dealing with your own maintenance, etc., we have got a service for that as well. So do speak to us and we can kind of come up with the best solution for you. But as I say, I've got Mr. Corporal Jones back on the screen because I don't want people to panic. I think I saw, I'm just going to deal with one question, which somebody said, is there any good news? I think, the thing is, we're just changing the structure of things. It's not, we're still going to rent things out. We're still getting good prices for properties. Properties over the long term are still going up in value. So rental property over the long term is still a great investment, but you do have to see it as a long-term investment. And really, let's face it, what this legislation is going to do is drive out the rogue landlords and leave people like yourselves, the good landlords, in the market. And if we're driving people out of the market, the unfortunate unintended consequence of this is probably that rents are going to remain strong and continue to increase over the long term because the supply is being kind of starved even further. So I don't think it's all bad. I don't think you need to panic. But I just do suggest people get help. I think I always, when I'm talking to people, I say, can you, can you write your own will? Yes, of course you can, but should you? Probably not. Can you handle your own divorce? Yes, of course you can, but you probably shouldn't do that either. It's a professional investment type now. I think rental property isn't a hobby investment anymore. It's a professional investment type, and you need professional help in order to manage all of this. So as a thank you for coming and joining us on this webinar, we have got an exclusive offer for people that are here tonight. If you're one of our managed clients, you don't need to worry about this because we've got things under control. Obviously, speak to your property manager if you have got any concerns. But anybody who's self-managing and wants us to have a look at, are you compliant, etc. We usually charge £250 for that, but we're offering a free tenancy health check where we'll have a call with you, either myself or one of our expert property managers, and we'll go through kind of where your liabilities are at the moment and what you can do to tighten things up and how we might be able to help you. If you do want to take advantage of that, just email that email address. Matt's putting the link in the chat section. You can sign up on that form, and then one of our property managers will be in touch with you to arrange that. And just finally, before we start answering any questions you might have, we've also got a service where obviously some of our clients are selling their buy-to-let from time to time. So Matt's going to again put the link in where if you are looking to increase your portfolio, you're kind of a serious property investor and you're looking to increase the number of units you've got, we do have properties that come up with a tenant in. They're very good investments, and we can offer them to you off market before they go on Rightmove and Zoopla and out to the public market. So if that's something you're interested in, we're just going to pop a link in is it the chat, Matt, or the comments, or wherever you're popping it? But again, you can always contact us and ask for that as well.
It's going in the chat right now.
Fantastic. So if you're interested in that, just click on that link and enter your details there. It's a separate database to our normal databases, so we'll only be sending those buy-to-let deals out to that database. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. We appreciate your time at this time on a Monday evening. Have we got any questions there that we need to answer, Matt?
Yeah, we've got a couple. So firstly, somebody's asked, do we think that there will be a charge for going on the for landlords register on the ombudsman scheme?
So we don't know what that will be at the minute, but I'd find it highly likely that there will be a charge. There are already selective licensing schemes in place in various councils across the country, and it's normally a few £100. But yeah, I would have thought there will be an administration charge for registering yourself on the database, but we don't know what that is yet. But of course, we'll update people as soon as that gets published.
And then another question was just regarding costs for the rent reviews, but I think the point is obviously, we're going to do the rent reviews for our clients, and depending on the level of service that they're on, it will depend on the level of charge that there will be. I think is the easiest way to answer that one.
Yeah, definitely. So yes, there will be a charge for doing that. Our managed clients pay less because obviously they're on retainer with us, but there is a lot of work involved in it. A lot of liability goes along with serving that Form 3 as well, and a lot of work will be needed to put into the comparable evidence now. So there will be a charge, but yeah, if it's not going to be thousands of pounds, it's in the hundreds, and we'd be delighted to quote people that need help with that.
And another question has come in. So this is a good point. So regarding the rent reviews, so let's say the landlord, so we go to increase the rent after 12 months. tenant objects, takes it to the tribunal, which takes, let's say, 6 months. And let's say it's found in favour of the landlord, so the tribunal say, yes, that was the correct rent increase. When can the landlord next do a rent increase? Is it going to be in 6 months' time, because that would be the full 12 months, or are they going to have to wait another 12 months from the tribunal saying yes?
A very good question. I think I'd need to just have a little look at. Do you know, Hannah?
Yes. So the rent increase sort of date will be from when the tribunal say yes. So then from when the tribunal say yes, it's 12 months from then. So it'll be delaying those annual rent reviews.
Yeah, but I guess obviously the tribunal is changing, but yeah, we can only increase rents once every 12 months at the moment as well. So it's only the tribunal bit that's sort of
Yeah.
putting a spanner in the works, isn't it? Have we got any other questions, Matt? Or is anybody who's here that wants to ask a question, please pop it in the chat now, and we'll happily answer that.
Sorry, we have had one more. So we're asking, if we use a Section 8 due to the property being trashed, antisocial behaviour, rent arrears, etc., does it still stand that you can't relet it for 12 months, or is that the court that decide?
No, so that 12-month protection is only if you are using a Section 8 because for grounds 1 and 1A, because you want to sell it, or you or your family to move back into it. And the whole point of that being put in place was to close the loophole, because obviously the government knew, if otherwise we would all just say, oh, we can't issue a Section 21 anymore, so we're going to issue, we're just going to say we want to move back in. So the government introduced that later on in the legislation to close up that loophole. So it's only for those two grounds.
So continuing on the Section 8, can you serve a Section 8 notice on one of the mandatory grounds in the initial 12-month period of them moving in?
No, so you can only serve it from month 8, because you need to give 4 months notice, and the tenant has a 12-month protected period. So essentially, no, you can't. So you can serve it at month 8, but it can't take effect until the expiry of month 12.
Okay. No, people saying thank you. You're still more than welcome. I don't think we have any other. Yeah, please. If you do have any other questions, do type away either the chat or the Q&A. Is there anything the Lord Change did to reward good landlords?
I guess I think, yeah, I get the sentiment. I get it for sure. I think all it has done is really, you basically know. I mean, it's massively protecting tenants, but it is going to drive out anybody who doesn't do things properly. Which, let's face it, that does drive opportunity. There may be rental properties coming up for sale that aren't in very good condition and that can be bought at a good price. It is going to have to drive out people that don't do things properly, and that could drive opportunity for others. But I do get that sentiment.
A question for Hannah, please. So Hannah, whilst the matter is while the rent review, is in the tribunal, will the rent protection from good Lord cover the rent payment?
Yes. So if the tenant stopped paying the rent because let's say they did the rent increase, tenant stopped paying the rent, it would be the same protocol if the tenant just fell into arrears. Obviously, the rent increase is something that we cover as like a separate claim. So we would cover the rent increase difference whilst it goes through tribunal. And then again, if the tenant failed to pay the rent increase from there, as soon as it accumulates, then Charles David Casson can get a claim in.
Perfect. Thank you. A question about animals, and I think really the answer to this is going to be quite well, it's going to all come down to opinion, isn't it? Really? But Neil, having animals in the property in a top floor flat usually means tenants won't open the windows. We don't want literally be raining cats and dogs. Condensation is a problem. Will this be a good reason to object pets?
I would probably say no to that. I don't think it would because it's probably unreasonable. I think the court would see it as unreasonable to assume that every tenant won't open the window. Um, you need to give tenants clear written instructions on how to manage damp and mold, and give them instructions on the fact that apartments need ventilating, they need heating properly, and they need ventilating daily, even in the winter. But I don't think that would be considered a reasonable objection. But you are right. It's down to ultimately with a lot of this. There's going to be some test cases, and then we'll start kind of getting case law built around it.
Okay, and then kind of well on the point of the tenant's behaviour, somebody's asked regarding AWAB's law. What do you do if the tenant refuses to put the heating on?
So yeah, difficult one. I mean, you can't obviously force them to put the heating on, but what would happen in that instance is you would give them written instructions to a number of times, and you would record that and have that as evidence, and then you would inspect the property regularly so that you could monitor the condition of it and take photos, etc., again for evidence. And then ultimately, if they weren't, and there was a persistent damp and mold problem that was caused by lack of ventilation, you'd probably end up going down the Section 8 route on a discretionary ground for the condition of the property and the fact that they're damaging it.
There's a concern about obviously the rental challenging, which I guess is going to be a big concern. Some saying, is it in their best interest to challenge the rent every year, as then they won't then have to pay the increases? You can obviously. My feeling is yes. Listen, there will be people out there that can play the game, but I also think we have to remember every tenant isn't after something for free.
Yeah.
A lot of them are very reasonable and will just if it's a fair rent increase, they will pay the increase.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's down to number one, fairness. It's down to providing comparable evidence. So actually, if we show a tenant, well, look, yeah, okay, you might want to go and dispute that. However, let me just show you three other apartments I've just rented at this price. I've also got access to all this data. It's about making a good enough case for that rent increase and remembering that not everyone is an arsehole. So whilst there are plenty of those out there, not everybody is. And so I think, we get it at the moment, tenants challenge rent increases. They just don't have the first, well, and actually, sorry, they do have the first tier tribunal option at the moment. It's not so widely known probably, but we're having people challenge rent increases all the time right now. And generally we're able to negotiate them and show them what else is renting for that price.
I think on that point as well, the communication between agents, landlord, tenant is key. So I think as long as there's good communication there, and as you said, not everybody will be challenging it, that'll be the main thing. And worst case scenario, if you got the cover, you'll be covered anyway.
Yeah, I think having a great relationship with tenants is going to be really important, and treating them like a customer, um, and making them feel a bit special, really, and making them feel important is going to be more important than ever.
Yeah, no, exactly. Somebody else just has asked if the meeting will be recorded. They only joined partway through, but obviously the meeting has been recorded, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. Yeah, and I think it should go out automatically, but if it doesn't, we'll be making sure it goes out to people.
And the question that's come in, I think, goes back to the basically the main change almost, which I think people are going to struggle to get their heads around. So someone's asked, well, can you still do a 6-month tenancy? But I think the point is we don't have fixed term tenancies anymore. We won't.
Yeah, that's right. And we don't have fixed term tenancies, but no, you can't, because you can't write a tenancy for any period of time because it's an assured periodic tenancy, but the tenant will automatically have a 12-month right. So, but it's a bit, people used to ask us, oh, could you write a 3-month tenancy? And little known fact was actually you couldn't do that because the initial period, the tenant already had a 6 month entitlement anyway. So that has extended to 12 months. But yeah, so you won't be able to do 6 month tenancies. But just remember, after that initial tenancy, then it continues on a periodic basis and you'll be able to give 4 months notice.
Great. Another question for Hannah, please. Sorry, Hannah, I know we're keeping you late
That's all
here.
right. No.
Somebody's asking, can the rent insurance be added at any point, or is it only at the start of the tenancy?
Yes, so it can be added whenever during the tenancy. One thing to note is if it's added mid-term, it will carry a 60-day no claims period, which I'm sure Neil would communicate with you anyway. But it just obviously protects us as an insurer. So any mid-term will have a 60-day no claims period, and it can be sort of from an eligibility perspective, it can be done on just a 12-month clean rent schedule. So if you have historic tenants that have been in there for 8 years, for example, as long as they've not been in arrears for the last 12 months, then we can insure it.
Great stuff. I've taken it upon myself to answer this one in the group chat, so I hope I've got the answer right here, Neil. Someone said, is it possible to ask for a extra deposit for pets to cover extra cleaning?
What was your answer?
I said no.
Correct. So you can, yeah. So the deposit regulations haven't changed. It's still a maximum of 5 weeks rent as a deposit. That is all you can take, and that is already in place under the Tenant Fee Act. And that's, yeah, I'm afraid that is that, which is why that rent protection policy gives you that extra cover essentially.
Okay.
Right.
I think there's a couple. Somebody's asked a question. So Sarah, sorry, I can't find you to at you. You've asked about condensation. But if you email the lettings at exactly what you're after about the condensation model, we can try and give you a better answer. One has just come in for Hannah again. Sorry, and then we will let her go.
Yeah.
Hannah, if a landlord has the good lord policy regarding the rent payment, if a tribunal rules against the rent increase, does the landlord have to refund the insurance on the increased payment?
Yes. So, like I mentioned, as I was running through it, we are led by the tribunal's decision. So, if you wanted to increase the rent by £100, but only £50 was fair according to the tribunal, then the difference would be owed back. Same with if the whole £100 was found unfair. But again, you're going to be increasing rents and looking at sort of market value, what everything else is going for. So hopefully that won't be a scenario, but it is a good question and something to consider.
Perfect. Okay. I think if we have missed any questions, please do email us, as say at lettings@charlesdavidcasson.co.uk, and we will come back to you. One person commented that I should smile a bit, but I think you didn't mention at the very start, Neil, that I do suffer with a resting bitch face. So I am genuinely happy, but this is just sadly how I look. Handsome but angry. So please, nobody worry about that.
Yes, I should have said I've just brought my angry brother along for the journey. But yeah, well, look, thank you very much, everybody, for giving up your time and coming along. Hope you found that valuable. Thank you so much, Hannah, for joining us tonight. We really, really appreciate that. And yeah, somebody said, can you take over an existing tenancy agreement I have running? Yes, of course we can. Please get in touch with us, Mark, or I will look you up after this as well. We'll get in touch with you. Someone else said, don't worry, Matt, we love you as you are. So don't worry about your face too much.
Our mum's obviously on the call.
Yeah. So no, thank you so much. Thanks, Matt, for your input and your face. Thank you, Hannah, for your time. And thank you, everybody who's come along. I'm going to click end event, and I have no idea whether I'll see you all in a minute or not. I'm talking to Hannah and Matt there. So yeah, goodbye, and thank you very much.
Well done, Neil.
Perfect. Thank you.